I never imagined that such a simple late-night delivery could change my life so much. It was just another day at work at Pizza Hut until my supervisor asked me to deliver an order to a remote address on the outskirts of town. I'd made deliveries to strange places before, but this one was different. My phone's GPS could barely find the location, and I had to drive for about 40 minutes to get there. When I finally pulled up to the entrance of that old, abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, I got that spine-chilling feeling you only get when something is wrong. There were no lights, no movement, just the sound of crickets and the wind rustling through the trees. Even so, I figured it was paranoia and decided to get out of the car. That's when they appeared. Two men dressed in black, their faces partially covered by hoods, stepped out of the shadows as if they'd been waiting for me. They didn't say anything at first, just motioned for me to go inside the house. I tried to argue, to tell them this didn't make any sense, but before I could turn around, another guy appeared behind me, blocking any chance of escape. My hands started sweating, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. They didn't look like they were joking, and I knew resisting would only make things worse. I walked into that house, terrified of what might happen next, but I never imagined what I was about to see. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of mold hit me like a punch. The house was dark, lit only by a few candles scattered across the tables. And that's when I saw it, maps. Huge maps covering almost every available surface. These weren't ordinary maps, they were detailed maps of the city streets, marked with red dots and notes I couldn't quite understand at first glance. There were also photos of various restaurants pinned to the walls, including one of the very Pizza Hut where I worked. My stomach churned when I realized this wasn't a coincidence. One of the men handed me a black folder without saying a word. When I opened it, I saw charts listing operating hours, employee routines, and even information about the security systems of various franchises. It was as if they had meticulously studied everything. I could barely process what was happening. My mind was racing, trying to figure out why the hell I had been chosen for this. Before I could ask anything, one of them spoke, his voice low and threatening, "If you tell anyone about this, you'll be the next target." He didn't need to repeat himself. I knew he wasn't bluffing. The way he looked at me, cold and calculating, made it clear they weren't messing around. My legs felt weak, but I managed to grab the folder and get out of that house as fast as I could. When I got back into my car, trembling like a leaf, I knew that night would haunt me for a long time. On the way back, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, afraid I was being followed. Every car that passed made my heart race like they were coming after me. I could barely focus on the road, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What did they want with me? Why had they given me that folder? And worst of all, were they really planning something big, and had I just been dragged into it? I knew I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. Those photos, the maps, it was all so specific. It was obvious they were plotting something serious, something dangerous. But what could I do? If I told anyone, they'd clearly come after me. That's when I realized I was trapped in a no-win situation. I got back to work still shaking, trying to hide it while I stashed the folder under the seat of my car. I couldn't even look my coworkers in the eye when I returned. Every time someone asked about the delivery, I made up some excuse, saying the customer was rude or the address was confusing. But inside, I was screaming. I couldn't stop thinking about that man's words, "You'll be the next target." It echoed in my head like a damn song I couldn't get out of my mind. When my shift ended, I went straight home and locked every door and window, as if that would somehow protect me from whatever they were planning. That night was one of the worst of my life. I barely slept, and when I did, I woke up drenched in cold sweat from nightmares of masked men breaking into my house. The next day, I went to work on autopilot, trying to act normal, but everything felt different. Every customer I delivered to seemed suspicious, every parked car made me feel like someone was watching me. I couldn't shake the image of those maps and the photo of the Pizza Hut. That's when I decided to take a closer look at the folder they had given me. When I got home, I opened it and spent hours analyzing everything. The charts showed times of minimal activity at the franchises, delivery driver routines, even the exact moments employees went to the storage room to grab ingredients. It was frighteningly precise, as if they'd done this before. That's when I started putting the pieces together. They weren't planning just some random robbery. This was coordinated, something big. They were planning to hit multiple franchises at once, causing as much chaos as possible. Just thinking about it made my whole body freeze. I knew I had to do something, but any wrong move could put my life in danger. For days, I debated with myself, should I go to the police or keep my mouth shut? Every time I thought about reporting it, I remembered that guy saying I'd be the next target. But I also knew that if I stayed silent, other people could get hurt, or even killed. The guilt started eating away at me, as if I was already complicit just by having that folder in my possession. On the third day, I decided I had to do something. I became obsessed with the idea that they might be watching me, so I tried to be as discreet as possible. I bought a prepaid SIM card from a random store far from my house and used a public library computer to research how to anonymously report criminal activity. When I finally called the police, my voice was shaking so much I could barely form the words. I told them everything: the delivery, the house, the maps, the folder, the photos. The officer on the other end was silent for a few seconds, and I started to think he didn't believe me. But then he said he'd passed the information along and advised me not to do anything else on my own. I hung up feeling a mix of relief and terror. What if they found out it was me? Would the police act in time? The following days were psychological hell. I didn't know if the police were actually investigating or if they'd ignored my tip. Every time the phone rang, I thought it was one of them threatening me. Every knock on the door made my body freeze in fear. I started avoiding leaving the house, even to go to work. My boss called a few times asking what was going on, but I just said I was sick. I couldn't risk going back to Pizza Hut while those guys were still out there. Then, a week later, I saw on the news that the police had conducted a raid and arrested a group suspected of planning coordinated robberies at multiple franchise locations. They showed footage of that abandoned house where I'd been. It felt like it was finally over, but I knew I'd never be the same. The feeling of having been chosen for this, of having been so close to danger, will never leave my mind. Even with the group in custody, the paranoia didn't leave me. I kept looking over my shoulder all the time, as if expecting one of them to appear out of nowhere and grab me. I had nightmares almost every night, reliving the moment I walked into that house and saw the maps and photos. I woke up sweating cold several times, feeling like I was still there, surrounded by those men in black. That's when I decided to seek help. I scheduled an appointment with a psychologist because I knew I couldn't deal with all of this alone. During the session, I poured everything out: the fear, the guilt, the trauma. He helped me understand that I wasn't to blame for what happened, but that didn't change the fact that I felt marked. It was as if I'd become an invisible target, even though I knew the culprits were behind bars. Today, months later, I still can't go back to Pizza Hut. I got another job, something completely different, far from deliveries and night shifts. Sometimes, when I pass by a franchise, I feel a tightness in my chest and quicken my pace. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened, but I'm trying to move forward. If someone asked me what I learned from all this, I'd say the world is much darker than we imagine. There are people out there planning terrible things, and sometimes, without meaning to, we cross their paths. I just hope I'm never chosen to be part of something like this again. This experience left a permanent mark on me, and even though it's over, it will haunt me for the rest of my life. When my manager announced that all employees had to attend a special training at midnight, I thought it was just some crazy corporate gimmick from the company. I mean, who does training in the middle of the night? But since I'm new at the restaurant and didn't want to cause trouble, I decided to go without questioning it too much. On the way there, I wondered if it was normal to have this kind of thing outside regular business hours, but I figured it was just another one of those weird corporate quirks. When I arrived, I realized something was off. The parking lot was completely empty except for a few cars belonging to coworkers who had also been called in. And there was a strange man waiting for us at the entrance, wearing an impeccable black suit and sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. I thought it was insanely suspicious, but no one said anything. We went inside the restaurant, and he started the so-called training. Nothing about it was normal. He turned on an old TV that was stored in the office and started playing surveillance footage of other restaurants being robbed. It was surreal. You could clearly see the criminals entering, holding the employees at gunpoint, and taking money from the registers. I was already starting to feel uncomfortable, but it was when he asked the question that changed everything: who among you can be trusted? We all fell silent, not understanding what he meant by that. Then, probably in some misguided attempt to seem interested, I raised my hand to ask what the hell was going on. He stared at me for a few seconds, as if analyzing every detail of my face, and then said, with an unsettling calmness, "You've just volunteered." My heart sank right then and there, and I knew I had just stepped into something much bigger, and much worse, than I could have imagined. At that moment, I wanted to just run out of there. But something about the way he spoke froze me in place. It wasn't just a threat, it was as if he already knew everything about me, as if he had chosen me even before I raised my hand. He continued the training, as if nothing had happened, but I could barely focus. My body was tense, my mind racing, trying to understand what he meant by, "You've just volunteered." I went home that night with a heavy weight in my chest, unable to sleep properly. The next day, I couldn't help but ask my coworkers what they thought of the training. Almost everyone said it was strange, but no one seemed as worried as I was. Even my manager acted like it was normal when I questioned him, saying only that it was a requirement from corporate and that I shouldn't worry about it. That's when I decided to do some research on my own. I started looking into information about fast food franchise robberies in the area and found something that chilled me to the bone. Several recent cases had something in common: the criminals always seemed to know exactly where the safes were, how the security systems worked, and even the shift change schedules. It was as if someone inside the companies was helping these groups. It hit me when I remembered the man in the black suit and sunglasses. He wasn't a corporate trainer, he was a recruiter. And I, without meaning to, had just drawn his attention. For days, I became obsessed with this idea, trying to figure out what they might want from me. Would I be forced to help with some scheme? Or worse, would they use me as bait or a scapegoat? The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. I started noticing small strange things at work that had previously seemed normal. Employees I'd never seen before would suddenly show up to adjust the camera system or inspect the storage area. And whenever I tried to bring it up, they quickly changed the subject. My manager also started acting differently toward me. He assigned me odd shifts, sometimes leaving me alone at the register late at night, and said things like, "You're one of our best employees now." It was as if he was preparing me for something, but I had no idea what. I wanted to confront him, to ask directly what was going on, but something told me that would be a terrible idea. Everything seemed connected: the bizarre training, the man in the black suit, the coordinated robberies. And I was in the middle of it all, with no idea how to get out. I started avoiding the restaurant as much as possible. I made excuses to skip shifts and even considered quitting, but I was afraid that might only make things worse. What if they already saw me as part of the plan? If I just disappeared, would they come after me? Paranoia took over my life. I spent hours online searching for similar cases, trying to understand how these criminal groups operated. That's when I found accounts from former employees of other franchises who had gone through similar situations. Some talked about recruiters who entered companies pretending to be consultants, while others mentioned being pressured to participate in illegal activities. One thing was clear: I wasn't the first, and I probably wouldn't be the last. But that didn't comfort me at all, in fact, it only made me feel more trapped. I decided I needed to take action before it was too late. I went to the police and told them everything: the suspicious training, the man in the black suit, the connections to the robberies. The officer who took my statement listened in silence, but I could tell he was skeptical. He asked several questions about dates, names, and details, but I couldn't remember much beyond what I'd experienced that night. I left the station frustrated, unsure if they'd actually do anything or if they'd just file my case away as paranoia from an overworked employee. To make matters worse, I started feeling like I was being followed. Whenever I went to the store or came home, it felt like a black car was keeping its distance, but never close enough for me to identify who was inside. I knew it could all be in my head, but after everything I'd been through, I couldn't trust what was real anymore. A few days later, I received a text message on my phone that sent chills down my spine: "You talked too much." There was no number or signature, but I knew exactly where it had come from. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. That's when I realized I had truly stepped into a dangerous game, and now there was no turning back. I completely changed my routine. I avoided going out at night, changed my route to work, and even stopped using my own car. I even considered moving to another city, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable. They already knew who I was, and if they wanted to find me, they would. All I could do was try to stay one step ahead, hoping the police were investigating in time. But in the meantime, I lived in constant fear, looking over my shoulder every minute, expecting something, or someone, to appear and grab me. A week later, the police finally contacted me. They said they were investigating a gang that used fast food franchises as a front for criminal operations and that the training man was one of the leaders. They showed me photos of him. Without the sunglasses, he looked completely different, but I knew it was him. I felt relieved that they had found something concrete, but at the same time, I felt a heavy weight realizing how close I had come to becoming part of it all. They asked me to cooperate as a witness, but they made it clear that doing so would expose me even more. I didn't know if accepting was brave or foolish, but I knew I couldn't just ignore everything and pretend nothing had happened. If I did nothing, other employees might end up in the same situation, or worse. Today, months later, I still don't feel safe. I leave the house every day looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that black car following me. I got another job, far away from anything related to restaurants or corporate chains. Even so, the feeling of being marked hasn't gone away. Sometimes, when I pass by a drive-thru or see someone wearing a uniform similar to the one I used to wear, my heart races, and I'm transported back to that strange night at the restaurant. I've learned that the world is much darker than it seems, and that sometimes, things that appear normal can be gateways to something terrible. I'll never forget the fear I felt or the lesson I learned: trusting your instincts can save your life. But this experience will haunt me forever, as a reminder of how close I came to crossing a line I could never return from. I just wanted to grab a quick pizza at Pizza Hut late at night. It seemed like such a simple, harmless idea, something I'd done hundreds of times before. The place was almost empty when I arrived, just a sleepy employee behind the counter and a delivery guy sitting near the door, scrolling through his phone while waiting for his shift to end. I ordered my favorite pizza and sat at a table near the window, watching the empty parking lot as I waited. It was one of those quiet nights I usually enjoyed, until I heard raised voices coming from the back. It sounded like an argument between two men, but I figured it was just some internal issue, nothing I needed to worry about. I decided to ignore it and kept looking out the window, distracted. When my order finally arrived, I noticed something was off. The employee who brought the pizza seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact with me. He set the tray on the table, his hands trembling slightly, and muttered something that left me confused: "Eat quickly." Before I could ask what he meant, the door burst open, and 3 masked men entered the restaurant. They didn't look like ordinary robbers, they carried themselves with calm precision, as if they knew exactly what they were doing there. One of them looked directly at me and said, pointing firmly, "You. Come with us." At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, but they weren't joking. I froze, holding a still warm slice of pizza in my hand, completely baffled by what was happening. I tried to protest, saying I was just a customer trying to eat a pizza, but they didn't care what I had to say. Before I could react, two of them grabbed me by the arms and practically dragged me to the back of the restaurant. There, I found the manager tied up and gagged in a corner, his eyes wide with panic. He stared at me as if trying to warn me of something, but there was no time to figure out what was going on. They threw me into a chair and started interrogating me. "Why are you here? Who sent you?" I could barely form words, everything felt too surreal to be real. How was I supposed to answer questions that made no sense when all I wanted that night was to eat a pizza in peace? But they weren't interested in explanations. One of them searched my things while another filmed everything with a phone. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. There was a camera mounted in the corner of the room, recording everything. It wasn't an ordinary security camera, it was professional grade, strategically positioned to capture every detail. They weren't there on impulse, this was planned, carefully organized. One of the men turned on the camera and began speaking into his phone, as if giving a report. "We've got another one. He doesn't know anything, but he can serve as insurance." Those words chilled me to the bone. Insurance for what? I had no idea who these guys were or what they wanted, but it was clear I had stumbled into something much bigger than I could have imagined. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out, but all I could do was sit there, trying not to make any sudden moves while watching this nightmare unfold. After what felt like an eternity, they dragged me out of the restaurant and shoved me into a dark car. I couldn't see much because of their masks, but I could feel the weight of the situation. Every move they made was calculated, as if they were trained for this. They didn't talk much to each other, just gave short, direct orders. I was taken to a warehouse on the outskirts of town, an abandoned place filled with dusty boxes scattered across the floor. There, they threw me into an old chair and left me alone for a few hours. There were no windows, just a faint, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I tried to think of something I could do to escape, but my mind was completely frozen. All I could think was, why me? What do they want with me? Hours later, they simply disappeared. I don't know if it was because they received a call or decided I wasn't valuable enough to keep around, but suddenly the place was completely empty. I managed to free myself from the makeshift ropes binding me to the chair and ran out of the warehouse, desperate to find someone who could help. When I finally got a cell signal and called the police, it was almost morning. They arrived quickly and started bombarding me with questions. That's when I learned the truth. The Pizza Hut where I had been kidnapped was being used as a collection point for extortion and illegal surveillance. The masked men were part of an organized gang that monitored people before making their move, and the most terrifying detail came when the police showed me messages exchanged by them. My picture had been circulating among them for days, as if they already knew I would show up there that night. The realization that they had known about my presence even before I walked into the restaurant completely shattered me. I couldn't understand how this was possible. I had no enemies, wasn't involved in anything suspicious, and was just a regular guy trying to have dinner. The police explained that the gang monitored security cameras from various establishments to identify easy targets, people who frequented certain places alone or seemed vulnerable. They had probably seen me on other nights, analyzed my routines, and decided I could be useful for something. But useful for what? I still didn't understand why they had kidnapped me, but the fact that they had planned everything so meticulously terrified me even more. It was as if I had been chosen to be a pawn in a much larger game without even realizing it. In the days that followed, I could barely sleep. Every unfamiliar sound made me jump out of bed, convinced they had come back to finish what they started. I spent hours thinking about all the times I had gone to that Pizza Hut before, trying to remember if I had noticed anything strange in the weeks leading up to that night. Had someone been watching me the entire time? Just the thought of it gave me chills. The police assured me the gang had been dismantled and that those men no longer posed a threat, but I knew I would never fully trust my surroundings again. Still, I decided to make some changes in my life, avoiding going out alone late at night, paying closer attention to the places I entered, and being more observant of the people around me. I had learned the hard way that not everything is as it seems, and that sometimes, even a quiet night can turn into a nightmare. The following weeks were an emotional whirlwind. I tried to return to my normal routine, but it was impossible not to feel different. Every time I passed by a restaurant or saw someone wearing a uniform similar to the Pizza Hut staff, my stomach churned, and I was transported back to that terrible night. I avoided talking about it with friends and family because I knew they wouldn't fully understand. How do you explain that something as simple as eating pizza can land you in the middle of a criminal conspiracy? But the truth is, it changed something inside me. I couldn't see the world the same way anymore. The feeling of being watched never left me, even though I knew the gang had been arrested. It was as if I had developed a permanent paranoia, always looking over my shoulder, expecting something bad to happen again. Today, months later, I still think about that night every day. Sometimes, I wake up drenched in cold sweat, reliving every second, the moment the masked men entered, the panic in the manager's eyes, the nonsensical questions they asked me. It was more than just a scare, it was a cruel lesson about how danger can hide where we least expect it. Still, I've tried to turn this experience into something positive. I've become more aware of my surroundings, trusted my instincts more, and learned to appreciate small things, like being able to go out to eat without fear. But the emotional scar remains, reminding me of just how vulnerable I really am. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life can change completely in the blink of an eye, and that some experiences never stop haunting us. I didn't plan to kill him that night. It all started with something small, an extra garlic sauce that never made it to my order. I had gone to Pizza Hut to unwind after a long, exhausting day, but that little detail irritated me deeply. When I complained to the cashier, he just muttered, "I'll see what I can do." But nothing was done. I decided to go up to the counter to confront the manager, thinking it would be a simple issue to resolve. He was busy organizing boxes of ingredients, looking distracted. When I approached him, he stared at me with an expression of indifference and said, as if I were invisible, "If you're not happy with the service, maybe it's best if you leave." That enraged me. It wasn't just about the sauce, it was the way he spoke to me, as if I didn't matter. As if I were just another number. But then something strange happened. As I was yelling at him, I noticed something on his desk, an open folder with pictures of me. Secretly taken photos showing me entering the restaurant on various occasions. There were notes about my usual orders, the times I came in, and even the car I drove. I froze for a moment, trying to process what it all meant. Before I could ask, he smirked coldly and said, "You really shouldn't have come here tonight." That sentence echoed in my mind like a warning, but it was already too late. My anger completely consumed me. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, one of those large ones used for cutting pizzas, and lunged at him. He tried to defend himself, but I managed to wound him in the arm. Blood quickly spread across the floor as employees screamed and ran out. For a brief moment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, as if I had finally reclaimed some kind of power. But then, as he writhed on the floor, he muttered something that chilled me to the bone, "You fell right into it." Before I could understand what he meant, two masked men appeared out of nowhere and overpowered me. They held me down with impressive strength, twisting my arms behind my back until the knife fell to the floor. Everything happened so fast I barely had time to react. They dragged me to the back of the restaurant, where I found more folders scattered on a table. Each contained secretly taken photos of other customers, along with detailed notes about their habits and routines. Phrases like, "Target confirmed," "Weak point identified," and even, "Ready for execution," were written on them. That's when it hit me, I wasn't just an unhappy customer who had lost my temper. I had been manipulated, studied, and chosen as part of some larger criminal operation. My whole body began to tremble as the pieces fell into place in my mind. The manager wasn't just an arrogant employee, he was part of something far darker. They had been watching me for weeks, maybe months, analyzing every detail of my life until they found the perfect moment to act. My outburst of rage wasn't just an impulsive reaction, it was exactly what they wanted. I had walked straight into their trap, handing them the perfect justification to make me the villain of the story. As I tried to process all of this, the manager, now with his arm bandaged, appeared in the doorway, smiling. He looked at me with a satisfied smirk and said, "You gave us exactly what we needed." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew I was in serious trouble, but I still had no idea how deep the hole I'd fallen into really was. Hours later, I woke up in a dark warehouse, tied to a chair. My head throbbed, and my body ached from the fight at the restaurant. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw the manager sitting across from me, filming everything with a camera. He seemed calm, almost pleased, as he watched me struggle against the ropes. "You were perfect," he said, chuckling softly. "You gave us exactly what we needed." His words echoed in my mind like a final verdict. I wasn't just a victim, I had been turned into a pawn in their game. They had planned everything, the extra sauce that never arrived, the calculated indifference, the photos and notes about me. It was all carefully orchestrated to make me lose control and react. Now, I was the guilty one in the eyes of the world, while they remained free to choose their next victim. Days later, I learned from the news that my case had become public. But not in the way I expected. The headlines read things like, "Customer brutally attacks restaurant manager," and, "Apparently dissatisfied man stabs employee over trivial issue." There was no mention of the folder with my photos or the files in the back room. To the public, I was just another violent customer who had lost his temper over something petty. No one knew about the criminal operation behind it all, except me. They had planted all the evidence needed to frame me completely, and now I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Even when the police came to interrogate me, I didn't know what to say. Who would believe me? A furious man who attacked someone with a knife looked far guiltier than anything else. That's when I realized how meticulously they had planned everything. As I tried to explain my side of the story to the police, I noticed how perfectly the pieces fit against me. The manager had been taken to the hospital with severe injuries, of course, nothing life-threatening, but enough to create a convincing narrative of victimhood. The employees who witnessed the scene confirmed that I had been shouting and acting aggressively, without mentioning anything about the masked men or the folders of photos. To everyone else, I was just an out-of-control customer who had lost patience over an extra garlic sauce. But to me, it was much more than that. It was a perfect trap, designed to destroy me. Even after being temporarily released while the investigation continued, I knew there was no easy way out. Every time I left the house, I felt eyes on me, as if someone was watching my every move. I started avoiding public places, fearing that any misstep could be used against me. Paranoia took over my life. I spent sleepless nights reliving that moment at the restaurant, wondering how I could have changed the outcome. But I knew it was useless. They were professionals, experts at manipulating people and situations. And now I was just another name on their list, branded a criminal by society, while the real culprit remained free, probably already choosing their next victim. Every time I passed a Pizza Hut on the street, I felt a tightness in my chest and quickened my pace, trying to escape the memories that still haunted me. I tried seeking help, but no one believed me. When I told people about the folders with photos and the masked men, they looked at me as if I were making excuses to justify my violent act. Even my family began to doubt my version of events. "Did you really lose it over an extra sauce?" my sister asked once, her voice tinged with disappointment. That hurt more than anything else. I knew there was no way to prove my innocence, they had erased all evidence that could incriminate them. The manager, the man who had orchestrated everything, was now portrayed in the media as an innocent victim, while I was painted as the villain of the story. It was as if I were trapped in a game where the rules were written by them, and I had no way to win. Today, months later, I still carry this experience like an invisible scar. I can't trust public places or strangers without wondering if I'm being watched. Every time I see a news report about organized crime, I think of them, the manager, the masked men, the folders of photos. They chose me because they saw a weakness, something they could exploit until I became exactly what they wanted, the perfect scapegoat. Still, I try to move forward, changing small things in my life to escape the past. But the truth is, I'll never forget that night at Pizza Hut, when a simple request for extra sauce turned me into someone I barely recognize. I learned the hard way that the world is full of people who know exactly how to manipulate others, and that sometimes, there's nothing you can do to escape them. It was my last delivery of the shift, a large pizza with stuffed cheddar crust for an address on the outskirts of town. The GPS indicated it was an isolated area, but I didn't think much of it. Strange deliveries were part of the job. When I arrived at the house, I noticed something unsettling. The windows were covered with boards, and there was a heavy silence in the air, as if the place were dead. I parked the car and sat there for a few seconds, staring at the worn-down building. Something about the scene made me uncomfortable, but I knew I couldn't just leave without delivering the order. I took a deep breath, grabbed the pizza bag, and rang the doorbell. I heard slow footsteps coming from inside, each one echoing as if amplified by the silence around me. When the door opened, I was greeted by a tall, thin man dressed in black clothes and wearing sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. He stared at me for a long moment, as if analyzing every detail of my face. "Did you bring my pizza?" he asked, his voice cold and direct. I extended the bag, but he didn't take it right away. Instead, he looked toward the car parked in the driveway, as if checking something. After a few uncomfortable seconds, he finally took the pizza and handed me crumpled bills, saying nothing more. Before I could leave, he muttered, "Wait." My heart raced. He closed the door and disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the threshold, trying to figure out what was going on. I quickly returned to the car, but he reappeared moments later, carrying a sealed cardboard box. "Take this," he said, placing the box on the passenger seat without asking permission. "Deliver it to the next address." He handed me a piece of paper with an address scrawled in hurried handwriting. Before I could protest, he added, in a threatening tone, "If you open the box, you'll wish you were never born." I drove in silence to the next destination, feeling the weight of that box beside me. Every turn made the contents inside shift slightly, and I could swear I heard something, faint muffled groans, almost imperceptible. My mind started racing. Was it food? Live animals? Or something worse? I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but that faint sound wouldn't leave my head. The scribbled address led me to another isolated house, with dim flickering lights in the yard. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. But before I could think about opening the box or calling someone, the door of the house opened. A different man answered, but he seemed to know exactly what I was delivering. He took the box without saying a word and slammed the door in my face. I stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at the dark entrance of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. On the way back to the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about that delivery. The sense of unease only grew with each passing minute. Who were those men? What was inside that box? I was certain something terrible was happening, but I didn't know how to act. When I finally got back to work, I tried to pretend nothing had happened, but my mind kept returning to that scene. Days later, I decided to discreetly investigate the first address as soon as I had the chance. I went back to that abandoned house, but it was completely empty. Or almost empty. When I went inside, I found shocking evidence: bloodstains on the walls, photos of gagged people, and detailed maps of fast food delivery routes. It was as if someone was using the delivery system for something far more sinister. Later, I learned from the police that the man who gave me the box was part of a criminal group that used delivery drivers as unwitting couriers to transport kidnapped victims in sealed boxes. I had been just another link in that deadly chain. That discovery left me completely shaken. I couldn't believe I had been used as a pawn in something so dark without even realizing it. Everything had seemed so normal at first, a regular delivery, like so many others I'd done before. But now, knowing what really happened, every detail of that night came back to me with frightening clarity. The way the first man stared at me for so long, as if assessing whether I was trustworthy. The casual way he placed the box in my car, without hesitation, as if he knew I wouldn't ask questions. And that final warning, if you open the box, you'll wish you were never born. It was obvious he was used to dealing with people this way, intimidating them to ensure compliance. And it worked. I did exactly what they wanted, without questioning anything. In the days that followed, I started noticing strange things. I felt like I was being watched, as if someone was keeping an eye on me while I worked or walked around the city. It got to the point where I would glance in my rearview mirror and swear there was another vehicle following me. I didn't know if it was paranoia or if they were really watching me, making sure I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. That's when I decided to go to the police. I told them everything, the strange delivery, the sealed box, the evidence I found in the abandoned house. They listened carefully and promised to investigate, but they made it clear I could be in danger. These groups don't play around, one of the detectives said. If they think you know too much, they might come after you. His words only heightened my fear. I could barely sleep, reliving that night over and over, imagining what was inside the box and the fate of the people who might have been in it. The paranoia began to take over my life. I avoided going out alone at night and changed my route to work every day, as if that could protect me from something bigger than myself. Every unusual noise made me jump, thinking someone was in my house or following me. I tried to return to my normal routine, but it was impossible not to think about that box and the victims who might have been inside it. I spent hours researching criminal groups that use delivery drivers as unwitting couriers. I found reports eerily similar to mine, people who had also been forced to transport packages without knowing the contents, until one day something went wrong and they found themselves involved in something much larger. The difference was that some of those people were never seen again. This only increased my fear that they might come back to silence me. Even with the police investigating, I knew there were no guarantees I'd be safe. They told me the group was extremely organized and had connections all over the city. They used fast food delivery routes because they knew they were reliable and discreet. Who would suspect a pizza delivery driver? But now I knew too much, and that made me a risk to them. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow and installed extra cameras around my house, something I never thought I'd do. I even changed some habits, like avoiding wearing my work uniform outside of work hours. All of it was an attempt to feel less exposed. Despite everything, I knew that constant sense of danger wasn't going away anytime soon. I had stumbled into a dark world unintentionally, and now I had to live with the consequences. Week after week, the tension kept growing. I felt like a cornered animal, waiting for the moment they would finally come after me. The police managed to arrest some members of the group, but the man who gave me the box, that tall, creepy guy with sunglasses, was still at large. They said he was the leader of the operation in the area, always one step ahead of the authorities. I saw his face on the news almost every day, and each time it happened, my stomach churned. It was as if he were staring at me through the screen, reminding me that I wasn't free. It made me realize that no matter how hard I tried to move on, that night would never stop haunting me. It had become part of who I am now, someone marked by fear. Months later, I still think about that delivery every time I deliver a pizza. I try to convince myself that I did what anyone would have done, followed instructions without questioning because it seemed normal. But the truth is, it changed my life forever. Today, I'm obsessed with details. I look suspiciously at any strange orders, avoid isolated areas, and always inform my supervisor when something seems off. I know I'll never fully overcome the trauma of being used as an unwitting courier in something so terrible. But I learned something important: the world is much more dangerous than it seems, and sometimes, even the simplest job can put you in situations you'd never imagine facing. And, unfortunately, that's a lesson that will stay with me for the rest of my life.